Hello everyone and welcome to Data Science Festival. It's a real honour and a pleasure for me to actually be kicking things off. Now, a quick note, so this is, didn't find out I was going to be doing this until yesterday afternoon/evening. My colleague Cassia, who works with me at Consultations, had an amazing talk lined up on empathy and data science, but unfortunately she's ill and can't make it, so I've stepped into the breach. And the title of the talk was originally 5 things that I learned managing my first data science project, but then I saw that I had 45 minutes to fill. So I thought of a 6th thing pretty quickly, but it was actually quite a relevant thing as well. It was something I wanted to include in the presentation anyway. So first, before we begin, would you all mind indulging me? Some of you saw me kind of size up a selfie in the corner. It'd be really fantastic if we could get a selfie of as many of the room as possible. I don't think we can all fit it on my camera. So if we can all just face this way. Okay, I'm also really crap at taking selfies, but I need to get a bit closer. And my camera's crap as well. Okay, I'm going to tweet that. So if you want to see if you made the cut, you probably didn't. That's my Twitter. Okay, so 6 things I learned managing my first data science project. I need to be over here, otherwise the camera's not going to pick me up. So my kind of rationale for doing this talk was that often you'll go to meetups and people will kind of, they'll talk about this fantastic thing they've done, or this amazing development they did. People don't often talk about the things that didn't go so well. And I kind of, for me, the first project that I managed was a real learning experience for me, and actually made the second project that I managed a lot better through the lessons that I learned. And so this presentation is around those lessons. There are 6 of them. I would urge that, I'm not perhaps the most experienced data scientist or the best kind of data science manager in the world, but hopefully some of you will find some value in some of the things. So, I've talked about that. So I'm currently senior data scientist for Mango Solutions. We are recruiting, by the way, if you're interested. But prior to that, I was a principal data scientist at the Department of Transport. They created their data science capability in 2015, which was just me. So, and I wasn't a data scientist beforehand, so it did feel a bit weird being called a data scientist capability. And for the first 18 months, my main focus was around delivering kind of small prototypes. By the way, come in, guys. I think there's still some seats around the corner if you're standing at the back. There's some at the front as well if you just want to come in and try and find a seat. So yeah, we were kind of creating prototypes. We created 3. One of those we kind of we presented it to the business. They felt that it had quite a lot of value, and they actually gave me money to actually go and recruit a team with, which in government that's practically unheard of, actually employing more people in this day and age. So the team that we kind of formed was, I would say, eager but inexperienced. None of us had really been data scientists before, and our first proper project was turning one of the prototypes I created around policy consultations into an actual product. And that turned out to be a lot more difficult than I first anticipated. So hands up here who knows what a public consultation is. Don't read that yet. Okay, so not many of you. So a public consultation is whereby if the government's thinking about introducing a new piece of policy or doing something new, often they'll actually write out to the public and ask them what they think. So 2 good examples of consultations that we did whilst at my time at the Department of Transport was the additional run rate at Heathrow, which a lot of people had very strong feelings about. And at the other end of the spectrum, there was a consultation that we did on the finer points of farm machinery and so on. So that kind of gives you an overview of the scale of the kinds of things that we consult on. So what happens is we write out, people respond back to us using a variety of media. So people will send us emails, they'll write documents, some people send us letters, some people send us audio files and so on. And what our people were doing with that was they were taking all these emails, they were copying and pasting stuff out of emails into Excel spreadsheets, they were opening up documents, they were copying and pasting documents into Excel spreadsheets. If we received a letter, what would happen is the letter would be scanned by our post-opening people, emailed up to policy people. Because they didn't have any means of extracting the text from the letter, they would actually type the letter out into the Excel spreadsheet. So the whole process was really, really manual. It was boring, and policy colleagues hated it. On top of that, we didn't really conduct any formal analysis. I think DFT is probably one of the bigger departments for consultations. I think we run somewhere in the region of 300 a year. And we can't, we don't have enough analysts to support that. So often there isn't any formal analysis performed. And when there is, it's usually just categorizing sentences into kind of buckets. There's probably a term for a kind of social research term for that. And again, the whole process, both in terms of the collating the responses and conducting the analysis, is really, really labor intensive. And for bigger consultations, for example, the one at Heathrow, we actually pay private industry to do that for us. So we came up with the solution, and it was an automated application that would extract data from emails, documents, letters, so on, basically unstructured and semi-structured data. We took that data, we cleaned it, we gave it some structure, we pipelined it into a database. We performed some NLP to kind of, in this case, we performed some unsupervised topic modeling to actually break the text down into the kind of the topics that people were talking about. And then we created a nice shiny dashboard and some APIs to enable people to access the data and enable them to explore it. Now, the whole thing was also done in the cloud. We actually used Azure for this. And it was the first time we'd done, it was the first prototype we'd built. It was the first prototype we'd scaled up into a product. It was our first kind of major project, and it was our first time working in the cloud. So there was a lot of firsts there for us, and the whole thing was a really huge learning experience. So, the 6 lessons. Lesson 1, don't start with the biggest problem. Now, for me, this was something that I feel that we got right. In terms of government, I think it's fair to say that government is a little bit behind the curve, both in terms of data science and technology. There hasn't been a great deal of funding since the 2008 financial crisis. And often when you lose funding, you lose resource, you lose people, innovation tends to be the first thing that goes out of the window. So this wasn't the biggest problem facing government. We felt that it was quite a unique problem that we could solve and it would scale well, but it wasn't like there was lots and lots of people kind of riding on it. Generally speaking, the first time you get people together, you're all doing something new. Your first project is never going to be your best work. 2 or 3 projects down the line, we were looking back at this policy consultation project thinking, oh my God, did we actually do, how does this even work? And a lot of the time, you kind of learn things in subsequent projects that, you want to go back and apply to the first project. And the danger is if it's something really, really huge and important, the danger is that you'll then have to go back to it and, continue going back to it as you learn. So what makes a good first project? Well, quick win. You want results in around 6 months. You want it to have a tangible impact. So if it's just a shiny thing, people will go, well, that's nice, but what's it going to do for us? You want to have engaged stakeholders, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that later on. And you want to actually use your first project to build credibility and for more projects. So you want to get people, the business, on board and excited with it, and thinking, right, well, what else? You've done this thing for this one bit. What else can you do for us? Is there any way that you can do this? And a good first project can actually really kickstart your overall data science capability and get people to come to you with ideas for ways in which you can apply this kind of stuff. Number 2, get the requirement right. Now, this sounds, really simple. It's obvious when you think about it, but there are degrees of getting the requirement right. So it wasn't like we had a 5-minute conversation with our policy colleagues and said, right, we're going to build this thing. We engaged with maybe 2 or 3 different policy areas. We talked about the consultation. We got a good feel for their requirements. But the trouble was, there was around about 30 policy areas in the department, and we didn't quite cast the net widely enough across those. We didn't really get a feel for how diverse the policy consultation process was, and maybe we could have perhaps spoken to some more of the analysts involved to kind of get a feel for the kinds of analysis that they wanted to produce over and above text analysis. The other thing I would say is permission and buy-in are 2 separate things. Now, I was really lucky to have a really good relationship with the head of policy in the department. She was really switched on for this kind of stuff. And when I put it to her and said, we can take on a 6-month project to do this, she was excited. She said, yeah, that's amazing. Go away and do it. And that was permission. Buy-in would have looked like, this is an amazing idea. Go away and do it. By the way, here is 3 or 4 people who I want you to work with to make sure that you get it right. And those people, if they're brought into the project, they're actually more involved in it. They can do things like hold you to account. You start to hit deadlines and do things like show and tells. Whereas if you've got permission, they might check in once a month to see that everything's going all right. And of course, you're going to say, yeah, it's going fine. But you're not actually going to get kind of a critical eye cast upon your work as you're doing it. We missed simple things that we could have done to make a big difference. One of those, I think, was around the creation of basic statistics. We could have, the dashboard was very much focused on the natural language processing and all the whizzy kind of topic modeling, but we could have produced some basic statistics, things like customer segmentation, respondent segmentation as well, or what kinds of people are actually responding to our surveys, how are the things, what are the different things that they're saying, broken down by age group, geographic region, so on and so forth. All of those things would have been really useful for pretty much all consultations. And during the second iteration, we really learned from our mistakes. We recognised we're a team of 4 data scientists, and that we're not user researchers, we're not business analysts, and as a result of that, it's probably best that we leave that kind of thing to the professionals. I think talking to customers is a big part of a data scientist's job, but if you're going to spend 6 months doing a project, it does make sense to actually engage some specialist help to make sure you get that requirement right. Okay, this may surprise many of you, but data science and machine learning isn't the answer to everything. One particular challenge we had was dealing with junk text. So when you, for example, if we get an email in, we're only really interested in the body of the email, we're not interested in the dear sirs, we're not interested in their signature, we're not interested in the virus scanning text that has been appended to their message and so on and so forth. So we thought, well, what's a good way to solve that? Well, we're data scientists. We can create a machine learning algorithm to solve that. So we did. That was like 2 or 3 weeks' work. It was boring, to say the least, because we were having to classify lots of text, and it was really computationally expensive. It turned the app from being something really quick and agile into something slow and ponderous that was a lot more difficult to deploy. When we finally finished writing the algorithm, we deployed it, and when we actually came to apply it to a new consultation, this was probably the biggest bit that failed. So for the first actual iteration we actually released for this product, it didn't work, and a big part of that was the machine learning algorithm that we've created. When we actually investigated it a little bit more deeply, we realized that 80% of the junk text was, in fact, the DFT's virus scan message that was appearing on every single email. So we wrote some simple regular expressions to remove this and a few other things, and that actually performed a lot better than the machine learning algorithm did. And I look back now and think, well, it was so obvious. Why didn't we just do that to begin with? But we kind of fell into the trap of thinking, well, we're data scientists. We're going to solve this problem as best we possibly can. We're going to create. But the value of the product wasn't in how we removed junk text. It was in the actual insight we were providing. So that's where we should have spent the time. Okay, number 4, processes are important. So I will confess, this is probably the biggest thing that I learned, probably our biggest mistake. I wasn't a huge processes person. I felt that we were a small team. We didn't perhaps need a lot of the kind of bureaucracy that came with processes, documentation, and so on and so forth, because we could talk to one another and work things out. So we didn't have processes for coding and development standards, managing access keys and secrets. We didn't have a testing process. We didn't have a QA and review process. We did have a deployment process, and it was actually really good. We used Docker, so deploying the app was 2 lines of code, but we didn't have a process for it. So next time we came to do it, if someone different was working on it, then doesn't necessarily mean that we would have done the same thing. And we didn't have any kind of templates or any kind of thing for documentation. And we did learn a lot because of the lack of those things that we didn't have, we learned a lot of harsh lessons along the way. As I said, the first iteration of the project actually failed. There was a lot of code that was actually in there that shouldn't have been, that wasn't doing quite the things that it was anticipated to do. Particularly, our review processes weren't particularly strict. We'd get together once a month and go through the code, which wasn't really an effective way of doing it. And the documentation didn't bear any resemblance to what we'd actually delivered because we wrote it like 2 months ago and hadn't bothered to update it. So those were really, really harsh lessons. And I think there's a fair amount of my own personal shame in that. And there was a few of you taking pictures of it. I'm not keen on that, but they're valuable lessons for me and hopefully for you as well. On top of that, so what we did to get around that, we kind of sat down at the end of the project. We conducted a retrospective. We were there for like between 2 and 3 hours, I think, going through all the things we think went wrong. And as a result of this particular issue, we actually created a set of open source processes determining how we do all these things. And it's not that the processes need to go to the nth degree, but there is a lot of value in that, and it's also, if you forget something, it also serves as a good reference. So if you forget the program we use to manage secrets or whatever, it's also a really, really good reference for that. You will have noticed the ... after the lesson on processes, implying that it wasn't finished, and this was the one that I added at the early hours, 6 o'clock this morning, and I haven't rehearsed this bit, so hopefully it won't be shit. But culture beats processes, and that is kind of, I'm still not happy with that wording, but I feel that culture, processes are one thing, culture is something slightly different. You need both. So the way I think about, culture is one of those things. So if you say, what's your organisation's culture? It's, you can answer that question in a million different ways. For me, culture is nothing but the collective habits of the team. And defining the process is really important, but they only have value if we stick to them. So we've got our processes, and our culture dictates that we actually stick to those. And you don't want to fall into the trap of writing too many processes, like process for everything, because you'll spend a lot of your time writing processes, which is boring and makes you want to jump out of a window, but it's also restrictive and bureaucratic. And there's no way you can legislate for every possible kind of eventuality. And that's where culture comes in, doing the right thing, discussing stuff as a team, thinking, basically trying to do the right thing and do it well. So a really good example, and I kind of wanted to, this was for as much to get it clear in my own head as for the presentation. So our processes state that we have tests and documentation. Our culture dictates that we write these as we go, and we don't do them at mad rush at the end. That's the right way to do things. Because during development, if you've got unit test is something you should be doing during development. It's no point writing them at the end, by which time it's already probably too late and you've wasted a lot of time. Okay, last lesson, maintain perspective. So one of the issues with being a small team, there were 4 of us, at one point or another we all contributed to the code base for the project. And me personally, I worked on it probably more than anyone else, and I think it's fair to say that I probably contributed to around 50 to 60% of the functionality and was responsible for reviewing or some way involved in up to 80% of it. And when you're so close to something and you're kind of in the code that does it, it's really difficult to kind of keep a sense of perspective. You can't, in terms of the overall project. I started to not use my time efficiently. I end up going down rabbit holes trying to solve things like to the nth degree. The machine learning algorithm to remove junk text is a really good example for that. I come across a new feature, like I came across the GenSim summarize feature, and it was about 10 lines of code to summarize a block of text. And I thought, well, that's really good. They're going to want that. So we spent a day kind of putting that in, integrating it into the pipeline and so on. But it wasn't part of our requirements, and there was no real user need for it. So that was, even though it was only a day, we now view that as a day wasted. And the last thing was around perpetually extending deadlines. So because I wasn't, I couldn't hold myself to account, I couldn't really hold the team to account either. And as a result, I kind of overran. We kind of missed deadline after deadline after deadline until eventually we delivered it, and it didn't work first time. And I think the one thing missing was an impartial voice to keep us on the right track. If you look at the way that an agile team is structured, you've got your delivery manager, you've got your scrum master, and you've got your development team. Now, it's actually the delivery manager who's responsible for the prioritization because they're not the ones actually writing the code, dealing with the low-down processes. So they can actually maintain that sense of perspective and say, why are you building a summarization algorithm when there's no user need for that? And it was that kind of thing that me trying to wear kind of multiple hats didn't really work too well. So those are the 6 lessons. Don't start with your biggest problem. Get the requirements right. Data science and machine learning isn't the solution to everything. Nearly everything, but not quite everything. Processes are important, but culture beats processes. And lastly, to maintain a sense of perspective. when I was actually originally coming up with this presentation, I found this quote, and it kind of served as a little bit of inspiration for the presentation, but it also quite summed up things quite well. We can look at the failures in this project as bad things, or we can actually say, well, actually, it's a good thing that all of this happened because we learned so much from it, and we were actually able to apply that going forward. And I think that was the real key thing, was actually we learned the lessons, we knew we did something wrong, but not only did we do that, we actually changed the way our team operates to actually start to perform a lot better. And now you look at the kind of the projects that the team were delivering up until the point I left a few months ago, and the way in which they were working, and it was like night and day. There was so much more that we were doing stuff so much better, we were doing stuff quicker, and all because we'd had that one shitty experience on our first project. So to kind of reiterate here, I know I've talked a lot about I've been quite critical of the first project, but it was successful in the end. The first time it ran, it failed. I spent like a weekend fixing bits, and then the team got involved the week after. We actually were able to manage to have it kind of up and running within 5 days of it failing, which was pretty good, and it worked. We created a working product, so we were really, really pleased with ourselves. And it's got value, and it's had an impact on our business. We must have run it now at Department of Transport. We must have run it for maybe around about 15 consultations now, and other government departments are interested in it well. But that's kind of, we want to balance that with the fact that it didn't work first time and it took far too long to build. And we made mistakes, but we learned from them and we applied the lessons going forward. But as I mentioned previously, our subsequent work has been a lot better. We actually feel like proper kind of data scientists / developers / ML, whatever you want to call us. But yeah, we feel like we're working well, and we're working kind of to an industry level standard. Okay, lastly, so I've talked a lot about my team and the kind of the work we did and the project we did. Data science, we have a phrase in government that data science is a team sport. And that means kind of can be construed two ways. The first thing is it's not possible for one single data scientist to know absolutely everything. So that's why we have areas of specializations. And secondly, as I alluded to earlier, you do need support, some kind of support network. You need people like product managers, scrum masters, user researchers, business analysts to help you kind of do the kind of the soft side of software development to enable you to really hone in on deliver stuff of work. Okay, so I did some, so as part of the kind of learning process from the project, when we were coming up with processes and figuring out new ways of working, I had a look at a few kind of resources. These were the three that really stuck out to me as being well worth a read. The first one is Machine Learning by Andrew Ng. It's a free book available on GitHub, and he talks about machine learning projects rather than like low-down machine learning kind of code. It's actually a brilliant book. I'd really recommend it. Secondly, The Rules of Machine Learning by Google. And I've got 6 rules here. They've got like 180 rules of machine learning, but there's a lot of really useful insight there. One of the things I took away from that was the importance of trying to solve a problem without machine learning before you try and solve a problem with machine learning. And they've got a lot of really good stuff on that. And lastly, the DataOps Manifesto. A lot of people think that DataOps is DevOps for data, and it's not. It's something a little bit more than that. I think there's a talk on it later. I'd thoroughly advise you to check it out. If you've only got a high-level overview of DataOps, go along, and you'll kind of realise that there's more to it, and it encompasses a lot more than just kind of DevOpsy kind of stuff. Okay, that was everything. Does anyone have any questions? You'll have to excuse me, I just need to blow my nose, so I'm going to take my mic off. I've got a horrible cold, so I don't want to deafen you all.
Well, whilst he's blowing his nose, I'll come down here. Thanks for the talk. So it sounds like government's a fairly conservative area. Did you encounter lots of people whose default answer was no, and how did you deal with it if that was the case?
Actually, no, I didn't. Everyone was really keen. I think, yeah, the main, it's very rarely I was told no. They let me do a lot of stuff which they perhaps, they would have been well within their rights to say no. Yeah, so I mean, when they did say no to stuff, it was like, well, they've said yes to so much other stuff, I can't really complain. Yeah, so it's not really a problem I had. It's not a problem I had in DFT. Other departments might tell you a bit differently, I don't know.
how do you identify rabbit holes so you can not go?
That's a really good one. Yeah, the way I personally do it, we are data scientists, and a couple of people on my, can you still hear me, by the way? Sorry. We are data scientists, and a couple of people on my team are more predisposed to going down rabbit holes than others. I'm one of the ones that's less disposed towards it, but that's not to say I don't do it. This last week, I kind of found myself working on the kind of intricacies of a function, and I am a little bit of a code Nazi now, and I'll try and get things absolutely perfect, so it's all in like the guidelines of the code. And it's, if that takes longer than if I'm taking longer than like 10 or 15 minutes on a single line of code, it's probably a rabbit hole. So it's kind of something that I kind of instinctively know. And then I make a call, well, is this really worth it? And most times it's not, and I just bodge it. But yeah, it's okay to do little bodges. If for things like that, what you don't want to do is a great big massive bodge, and yeah. That was a really woolly answer. Sorry.
No, I think the time is right.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you. Oh, is it working? Yeah. Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. I wanted to find out if you were to give the most important key thing that you learned when working with government, and what would that be? One. Secondly, I would ask that if any prospective data scientist wants to have any sort of projects, anything like that with government, how is it possible to maybe, government is quite risk-averse, isn't it? So maybe try to make them a little bit come out of the shell more?
Okay. To answer the first question, I've thought about that a lot lately, actually. And I would say the longer I work in data science, particularly having had a team, the job for me becomes less about algorithms and writing code and more about inspiring, motivating people. Even when I was on my own, there was very little that I could accomplish on my own without involving others as allies or whatever. Could you repeat the second part of your question? Sorry.
The second question basically was all about that, as you know, government in any sort of projects, they're quite risk-averse.
Yeah.
Obviously, I understand about the funding, but let's say, put the funding issue aside. Let's say you've got all the funding you need. Okay? But then, they're really, really, cautious. Oh, if we do this, it's going to break, basically.
Yeah.
So maybe put them at the ease a little bit. How would you possibly do that? Or maybe, because, as you know, technology and society is moving quite fast right now.
Yeah.
And so maybe what the pace of government is in comparison.
Yeah, I think for me it's having a no blame culture. So if it goes wrong, we recognise, we have this thing we say where we recognise, sorry, I need to go back, so I'm picked up on the camera, sorry, and I'm going to kick the lights. We have a thing that we kind of say, if something goes wrong, it's not necessarily the fault of anyone, it's just more often than not, it is the process that's at fault. In terms of bringing kind of people out of their shell a little bit, for me, I'm an extrovert. I'm probably the biggest extrovert you'll ever meet in the field of data science. But I do kind of, my team are a lot less extroverted than me, and they're a lot less kind of inclined to do things like dealing with stakeholders, presenting their work. And it's something that I kind of encourage them to do. Getting up in front of people and explaining your work, and public speaking is a really valuable skill. And that I feel that's got a lot of carryover into things like being comfortable in meetings, kind of having a dissenting view in a meeting with lots of senior stakeholders and that kind of thing. So it's something I try and gently encourage it. But it's got to be, they've got to want to do it. You can't make people do that kind of stuff. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Tom. I've got a question about the culture that you talked about. And you mentioned that at various points you thought it might be beneficial to have a kind of independent person or somebody to bounce things off. And I guess I'm asking this question as an ex-government analyst, and I just wonder whether that might be because the data science profession is less mature within central government than, say, the Government Economic Service. Mm-hmm. So if you do an impact assessment in the Government Economic Service, there's a standard, there's a process, there's what good looks like, and perhaps you were having to navigate that because it didn't exist yet.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think, are you still in government now, or? Okay, so I was in 2015. We were literally just kind of getting started with data scientists. in 2019, things were a lot better. We are starting to see things like processes and ethics, the kind of stuff emerging, but it's still really young. And you know, at times when especially when I was on my own, it did feel like really lonely. And, you know, you kind of felt that almost sometimes crushed by the weight of expectation that was riding on you. And that's certainly something we felt also when we kind of upscaled into a team. But you know, the thing I would say is that we did talk a lot to other data science departments, both inside and outside of government, as well as, you know, developers and software engineers, because fundamentally we wanted to build software same as them, and we're actually able to learn quite a lot from that process. And that's what kind of we took all of that knowledge and kind of that became the kind of the genesis of our processes.
Can I ask another question?
Yes, of course you can.
Just less as an analyst, but more, I guess, as a citizen. Because what you've described is a way of automating, making methodical how civil servants extract insight from citizens, companies, whoever bothers to respond to a consultation. And my question is really, you alluded to it. If I respond to a DFT consultation as a citizen, will it go through your process?
Maybe. It depends upon if the team want it to.
Right.
So what we always said was, from the beginning, we said that this isn't a replacement for the policy consultation process. This is something that we're going to do to make it easier. So a lot of the time, we'll run our app in, well, actually, I think all of the time, we'll run the app in conjunction with them actually doing the manual analysis. So it's, at the moment, it's that prototype stage where we don't really feel comfortable enough basing any decisions solely on what the application says, but we're using it as a tool to kind of help them make sense of a lot of what's going on, you know, kind of add to a lot of the stuff that they're doing already. But in 10, 15 years, when, you know, AI is a lot palatable, who knows?
Thank you.
There's lots of questions. This is good. This proves that people were actually listening. So,
you want to go first? Okay. I'm really interested in teasing out what you were saying about leaving in your second iteration. You actually found it better to actually devolve some stuff out to external teams. The point you mentioned about SMEs and business analysts. It's a running joke in my organisation, certainly in architecture, that 80% of our business analysts are frankly scribes.
okay.
Yeah, and the requirements you're getting are dire. Did you find? Yeah, you're laughing. Did you find that actually you were actually looking for more specialist kind of business analysts, or was it just kind of contract roles?
So the setup was that we were kind of a data science team in one area of the business, and our digital department were kind of a separate, much larger area of the business. And we initially wanted them to kind of give us some resource. Now, generally, they are. I mean, agile in government is, you know, it's enormous. It's almost a religion for people like GDS and the way in which that they build software. It's very strictly, you know, you've got the GDS service manual. They follow that to the letter. And that includes a lot of things around like the user researchers, business analysts, the soft kind of things. So we knew that they would do that properly. In the end, they didn't. They couldn't offer us the resource, so we actually contracted it out to another part of government, the Cabinet Office Policy Lab, who were kind of looking at innovative ways for doing policy. What they were actually able to come in and do, they built things like timelines, they built user stories, all the stuff that we didn't really think to do. You know, we essentially, if we were functioning as business analysts / user researchers, we would be the scribes. But the Cabinet Office came in and actually did it properly and showed us, well, actually, now you've created a user story. This is how you can then align the features that you develop in your kind of app to the user stories. So there's a kind of flow through from the requirement to the actual solution.
So it's a quick one. I'm not a data scientist. It's following through from the previous speaker's question. In any organization, there's a lot of data that goes in, and then what data scientist team works on it, and you get an output of some kind of insight. Often what happens in the middle can be opaque to somebody who's not a data scientist or a computer scientist. Did you have any problems in your organization in explaining to, let's say, the end user as to what happens, what process we're involved, and how do you convince them that data going in and the insights that you're deriving from the data is correct?
So we were lucky we didn't do it too complicated. In terms of the cleaning, that was really easy to explain. We were able to explain the steps before we modelled the data, and the actual data itself was an unsupervised topic model, which is one of the easier things to explain. On top of that, we did have there is a really good visualization package for topic models in Python, and we were actually able to leverage that. And that kind of brought it to life for them a lot in terms of how it would bundle things together, how they could explore that. But in the end, we kind of, after much umming and ahhing, we decided that instead of releasing the dashboard to them, we would actually do the analysis using the tool rather than them, just to make sure that it was done correctly for the initial stages. So whilst they could understand it, we didn't feel comfortable enough to kind of let them loose with it, if that makes sense.
I think that's all the time we have, so let's give Tom a warm hand. Thanks, everyone.